Hello my friends, are you fans of Final Fantasy? I sure am. I've played the vast majority of the games. Today I'd like to show you a painting of an African woman as well as a black woman riding what seems to be a chocobo, painted by Yoshitaka Amano, the man who has been with the Final Fantasy series since the beginning. Let's start the show! Alrighty, so before we begin, you might notice that I have on screen some other examples of Amano painting black people, just to highlight the fact that the primary artworks that we're going to be showing off today are not the only examples of this. And if you've played Final Fantasy, you know there are black people in the Final Fantasy series. I would say that Final Fantasy probably has more black representation than a lot of JRPGs out there. Anyway, the reason I wanted to do today's video is because one of the artworks that we are highlighting today is specifically referencing African culture. By the way, if you're new here, I talk about African culture a lot and often in relation to video games. So, if that sounds interesting to you, please subscribe for more. Wow, the sun is going down quickly, huh? Well, without further ado, let's show that painting. Isn't this a beautiful artwork, folks? Now, I know, I have to address the elephant in the room, or in this case, the moogles in the room. Those moogles are not actually part of the artwork. I added those myself. The reason why is because YouTube is not a fan of nips. So I had to cover up those nips somehow, and instead of using an old black bar, I decided why not just throw a moogle in there. And as for why there's two other moogles on the floor, well, I like moogles, so I added some more. More moogle friends, always a good idea, right? Anyway, look at this woman. You could easily imagine her being one of the title artworks for maybe Final Fantasy 16 or something like that, whenever the hell Final Fantasy 16 ever comes out. That said, this is one of Amano's non-Final Fantasy artworks, and it's not related to one of his other famous things like Vampire Hunter D either. This artwork is just one of those random artworks that he's made that we have no context for. At least I sure don't. It's literally titled Plot 55, and there's a series of artworks of his that are literally just the word plot with a number attached to it. So I don't know what the background is for why Yoshitaka Amano painted this, unfortunately. That said, I think it's a fantastic artwork that more people should see. Alrighty, so let's talk about the African references that we can see here. The first thing you may notice is her jewelry. The style of bracelets and anklets and even the many necklaces she wears is something that you can see in many parts of Africa, though not quite the same in each region, but still similar. On screen now we have some girls from West Africa. The girl on the left is Efik, and the women on the right are Igbo. And as you can see, the bracelets and anklets they wear are pretty similar to what we see in this artwork. Next on screen we have some women from East Africa. On the left you'll see some Maasai girls, and they're wearing colorful bracelets as well as multiple necklaces. And on the right we have a Tharaka bride, and she has multiple necklaces as well as those long ringed anklets that we've been showing. And finally, let's look at some women from Southern Africa. As you can see on the left we have a Himba woman, and Himba women often wear multiple necklaces, multiple bracelets, and they got those long anklets. And on the right you have an example of an Ndebele woman who is standing in front of her house right now, and she has multiple necklaces, and she's got those nice long bracelets, long anklets, so you see what I'm getting at here. Again, I want to emphasize that I'm not saying that all the jewelry among all these cultures is exactly the same. You have eyes, I'm sure you can see the differences, but I hope that you can also see the kinds of commonalities that I'm pointing out here. And that is why when looking at this artwork that Amano painted, I can look at this woman and think to myself, that's not just a black woman, that's an African woman. But of course that's not the only aspect of this painting that shows African influence. You can obviously also look towards the masks in the background. Now some of those masks are just creations of Amano in general, but some of those masks are actually inspired directly from real African masks. The three masks that I have circled on screen now are based on the Kifwebe mask of the Songye peoples of the Democratic Republic of Congo. These masks utilize their magical powers to maintain social and political control. There are both male and female variations on the mask. Some of the things that the female Kifwebe mask is involved with is the funerals and the investitures of chiefs. And as for the male mask is involved with the maintenance of roads, fields, and also preparation for war. If you're wondering why two of the masks are too small for a human face, that's because those are about the size of a passport mask. So those are real types of masks that exist. I'll get into more detail about passport masks another day. And if you'd like to learn more about the Kifwebe, well, I've actually talked about this mask before in another video, and I'll link that at some point in this video. Anyway, let's move on to the other two masks that we can see. First, let's talk about the mask in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. This mask appears to be made out of a human skull. Anytime I see an artist from Asia or Europe or America or whatever, when they draw quote-unquote tribal cultures, they have a tendency to overuse skull and skeletal imagery, and that just sort of shows a certain level of ignorance. Even though I have a great amount of respect for Yoshitaka Amano, if I were in the room when he was painting this, I would have been like, dude, no, don't do the skull. Just let me show you some actual African masks and you can paint one of those. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there isn't any African artwork that uses skeletal remains. It does sometimes happen, but I can only think of one mask that uses a human skull, and that example has two human skulls placed above the head. I forget what that mask was, because I saw it in a book a long time ago, but for the most part that's pretty uncommon. Now I'm not saying that an artist should never use skulls or skeletal remains in their quote-unquote tribal imagery, but if they're going to do that, they should put in the research to do an accurate kind of reference. For example, in my video game that I've been hinting at but I haven't shown you guys yet, I have one graphic that is based on a Mabra sculpture from the Bale peoples, and those sculptures sometimes actually use a real monkey's skull. So again, you can draw some skulls in your artwork, alright? I'm not saying you can't, but if you're gonna do that, put in some damn research, please. And the reason I'm emphasizing this point is because I believe a lot of people out there, a lot of hateful people, will include imagery of dark-skinned people with skulls and bones as a way of being racist and trying to show these people as, in their mind, being primitive. And that's why I usually, most of the time, would recommend that you avoid imagery of skulls and bones and shit. Okay? Alright. Hopefully y'all understand me on that. Okay, let's move on. Luckily, this last mask I have to show you at the top is not controversial at all. It's not seemingly a direct reference to anything, but it could be, in that it could be an amalgam of different masks, because it doesn't look like any specific mask that I've seen, but it does, for example, look kind of similar to the Kifwebe that we've been talking about, but it also has some other elements that you wouldn't see on that particular type of mask. For example, that circle at the top of its head kind of looks like the circle that's usually at the top of the head of a Tetela mask. And that's Tetela, not Tella. And you'll also notice that this mask has big bulging red ringed eyes, which could be influenced by the Bois masks of Burkina Faso. And there could be some other things mixed in there as well. Anyway, it's a really nice creative design that Amano made for that particular mask. Anyway, although this artwork is certainly not perfect, it's a really amazing artwork in my opinion, and I hope you like it as well, and I'm glad I got to show it to you. Now let's talk about our next featured artwork, which has what I believe to be a more direct link to the Final Fantasy series. Luckily I don't have to censor this one with moogles. Anyway, this image is called Flight of Fancy, and like the previous image, I can't find any information on it. But as far as I know, this is not some concept artwork for Final Fantasy, and yet it has a chocobo. Now some of my fellow Final Fantasy fans will be thinking to themselves, that's not the cuddly bird I remember. But if you looked at the original Amano painting of a chocobo, it looks like this. Yes, that's right, it's also a weird featherless pink bird. And even though that original concept artwork doesn't feature weird Tyrannosaurus Rex-like appendage arms, you can look at Final Fantasy V's artwork of a chocobo and see those same tiny T-Rex arms on the chocobo there. So, as you can see now, this is clearly a chocobo. Before we move on, I gotta do a little mini rant of sorts. Okay, so the chocobo in Final Fantasy V that I just showed you, that clearly has Bart's and Leno, we all know them. But let's look at that Final Fantasy II chocobo a little more closely. Who the fuck are those two guys? I've played Final Fantasy II. They don't look like any motherfucker from that game. Who the fuck are they? Were they cut characters? I'd like to know. Oh, and I probably should point out the reason why this guy's face is pure black is probably not that he's black, but because his hat is probably casting a shadow over his face, similar to the black mages in the games. By the way, there seems to be some difference of opinion about the origin of this chocobo painting. Some attribute it to Final Fantasy II, some attribute it to Final Fantasy III, which is kind of weird because the chocobo were definitely in Final Fantasy II. But either way, if it did originate in Final Fantasy III, I still have basically the same question, except instead of who are these guys, I'm wondering what the fuck are these job classes? My best guess is that the lounging dude is in fact a black mage, and the green guy is maybe a summoner. Or perhaps we might be looking at some job classes that were cut from the final game. I don't know. You can let me know what you think in the comments. But anyway, that little mini rant kind of brings me back to the artwork we're looking at, Flight of Fancy. Was Flight of Fancy some cut concept art for Final Fantasy? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe this young black woman was originally a playable character. I don't know. Or meant to be a playable character, I should say. Who knows, really? But it's also just possible that Amano was just painting this painting and decided to draw a chocobo because, hell, he invented the damn thing. He can probably just put it in any old artwork he wants, really. Well, specifically, he invented this style of chocobo. The style of chocobo that you're all used to seeing in-game, the cuddly one, was something that Squaresoft ripped off from Hayao Miyazaki, because look at the birds from Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Doesn't that look familiar? As for why they ignored the artist that they paid to design a chocobo and just went with a chocobo design that they don't even hold the rights to, I don't know. Whatever. I mean, to be fair, it's not exactly the same as the Nausicaa birds, but it's pretty similar. Anyway, let me get back to my main point. The artworks we showed today just makes me think that one of these days we really need to have a black man or a black woman be the main character of a Final Fantasy. Not a supporting character. We've seen black supporting characters in Final Fantasy. I want to see a black main character in a Final Fantasy game. It's about time we see that happen. So Square Enix, let's make it happen. Alrighty, that's it for today, folks. I will have some more Final Fantasy videos in the future, but in the meantime, you might also be interested in checking out some of the many Zelda videos that I've made. Alrighty, have a good day, folks.